Welcome to the Literary Narrative. Hello, dear listeners. Today we will embark together on an extraordinary journey through time to an era where human dignity was tested by the most adverse circumstances, a story that teaches us about resistance, hope, and the silent strength that dwells in the hearts of those who refuse to surrender. Imagine a young widow expelled from her own home on a stormy night, carrying only her small son and a mysterious key. In the ruins of an old Mexican colonial inn, she will discover that the walls hold more than history. They hide a treasure that will change not only her destiny, but that of an entire community. A narrative about how injustice can awaken hidden forces that transform victims into heroines. Where are you watching from? Leave your city in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like so more people can discover these transformative stories. Year: 1881. Location: Hacienda San Rafael, Guanajuato region, Mexico. An era where the ashes of the War of Independence still smoldered in collective memory, and the winds of modernization began to blow through the mountains of the Sierra Madre. The first drops of December fell like frozen tears over the cemetery of the Church of San Rafael, each one carrying the weight of a definitive farewell. The smell of wet earth mixed with the aroma of burning copal, creating a dense atmosphere that seemed to suck the oxygen from Esperanza's lungs. At 25 years old, she remained motionless before the freshly dug grave, her black rebozo undulating in the wind like a flag of surrender. Her delicate fingers, still marked by the calluses of domestic work, gripped the small hand of Emilio, her 8-year-old son, who trembled both from the cold and from the confusion of not understanding why Papa would never come home again. Francisco Mendoza now lay beneath the red earth of Guanajuato, victim of the typhoid fever that had ravaged the region. His robust body, which had once carried sacks of corn and repaired stone fences with ease, had succumbed in just 1 week, leaving Esperanza orphaned of future. Father Sebastian murmured prayers in Latin, his words lost in the noise of rain that was beginning to intensify. The hacienda workers maintained respectful distance, their sombreros dripping water, furtive looks of compassion directed toward the young widow who had become, overnight, an unwanted burden for the Mendoza family. It was when firm footsteps over the wet cemetery stones announced the arrival of Doña Catalina. The matriarch of the Mendoza family, at 68 years old, walked with the aid of a finely crafted silver cane, her black mourning dress contrasting with the haughtiness of her aristocratic bearing, her small penetrating eyes, like those of an eagle, fixed on Esperanza with a coldness that rivaled the mountain's temperature. Esperanza Morales, she pronounced the name as if it were a curse. It's time for you to know your place now that my son is no longer here to protect you. The rain intensified, transforming into a storm that made the cemetery cypresses dance like ghosts. Doña Catalina extended her gloved hand, revealing a forged iron key, heavy and ancient, with details suggesting it was older than any living memory. "This is the key to the ruins of El Descanso del Viajero," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a razor. "Francisco, in a moment of sentimental weakness, registered that cursed property in your name. Now, it's your responsibility. You and the boy have until dawn to leave the hacienda." Esperanza felt the world spin around her. Catalina's words echoed in her ears like the sound of funeral bells, announcing not only Francisco's death, but the death of everything she knew as home. "Doña Catalina," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "I have nowhere to go. The ruins are in the Sierra. There's nothing there but crumbling walls." "Exactly," replied her mother-in-law with a cruel smile. "You bewitched my son with your beauty of a common woman, but now you'll pay the price for your audacity. Those ruins are all that an intruder who dared enter our family deserves." The echo of the cane striking 3 times on Francisco's tombstone sealed Esperanza's fate like a blood oath. Dawn rose pale over the Sierra de Guanajuato, tinting the mountains with a melancholy gold that contrasted with the darkness that had taken hold of Esperanza's heart. She wrapped the few possessions she had, 2 changes of clothes, a wool blanket and her mother's rosary, in a faded rebozo that had belonged to her grandmother. Emilio, still sleepy and without fully understanding the gravity of their situation, held a wooden horse that Francisco had carved for him. The toy now seemed like the last thread connecting them to the life they had known. "Mama, where are we going?" asked the boy, his small voice echoing in the empty corridor of the big house. "We're going to our new home, mijo," Esperanza replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A place where we'll be masters of our own destiny." The journey to the ruins, stretched for 7 kilometers through the snowy Sierra, a serpentine path that climbed and descended hills covered with nopal, cacti, and ocote pines. La Esperanza had made this journey only once before, years earlier, when Francisco had taken her to show her the property he had inherited from a distant uncle, a place he himself considered uninhabitable. Without horse, without cart, without even provisions for the journey, mother and son began their walk under the still weak morning sun. The thin air of the altitude burned their lungs, and with each step, loose stones on the path threatened to twist their ankles. After the first hour, Emilio began to complain of fatigue. Esperanza, without hesitation, lifted her son and positioned him on her back, tying him with the rebozo, in a technique she had learned by observing indigenous women at the market. The additional weight made her shoulders burn, but the determination shining in her dark eyes was stronger than any physical pain. The path became steeper as they approached the location. Various species of cacti flanked the trail, pitahayas bisnagas, and the immense nopales whose fruits, the tunas, now represented a possible source of food. Esperanza made a mental note to return to collect them when hunger pressed. The smell of wild thyme and sage permeated the air, mixing with the resinous aroma of ocote pines. Occasionally, the song of a clarion or the distant cry of a golden eagle cut through the mountain silence, reminding them they were entering wild territory. When the sun reached its zenith, the ruins of El Descanso del Viajero finally revealed themselves. What remained of the old colonial inn was a skeleton of adobe and volcanic stone walls, rising like broken teeth against the intense blue sky of the Mexican Altiplano. Part of what had been the roof had collapsed, leaving wooden beams exposed like ribs of a dead animal. Esperanza set Emilio down and remained silent for long minutes, contemplating what would now be their home. The walls, though damaged by time and wars, still maintained a silent dignity, as if they guarded secrets from past eras. "Is this where we're going to live?" asked Emilio, his voice echoing among the empty ruins. Esperanza knelt beside her son and held his small face in her hands. "Yes, mijo. And we're going to transform this place into something beautiful, you'll see." But when the cold Sierra wind began to blow, bringing with it the smell of distant rain, Esperanza wondered if there was enough courage in her heart to fulfill that promise. The first night in the ruins was a symphony of silent terrors. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls like wandering souls, and every noise, the cracking of dry branches, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of coyotes, made Esperanza hold Emilio tighter against her chest. She had managed to improvise a shelter in the only part of the structure that still maintained some intact roof beams, covering the openings with ocote branches and her own blanket. The packed earth floor was cold and hard, but it was all they had between their bodies and the hostility of the Sierra. Emilio's stomach rumbled with hunger, a sound that pierced Esperanza's heart more deeply than any blade. During the day, she had tried to find something edible, obtaining only some ripe tunas that barely quenched their thirst, leaving a sweet and bittersweet taste in their mouths. It was during the early morning that real danger manifested itself. A low, threatening hiss cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of a rattlesnake that made Esperanza's blood freeze in her veins. In the semi-darkness, she distinguished the undulating silhouette of a rattlesnake that had crawled into the shelter, attracted by the warmth of their bodies. Without thinking, moved by a maternal instinct older than civilization itself, Esperanza grabbed a sharp stone that was within reach of her hand. The reptile raised its triangular head, displaying venomous fangs in a final warning gesture. "Don't move, Emilio," she whispered, her voice so low it seemed more like a thought than a word. With a precise and lethal movement, Esperanza struck the serpent's head, the sound of impact echoing between the walls like a gunshot. The viper's body writhed in spasms before finally becoming motionless, its scales shining in the weak starlight. Emilio awoke with the noise, but Esperanza had already pushed the lifeless body away from the shelter. "It was just a branch that fell, mijo. Sleep." In the following days, the survival routine established itself with methodical cruelty. Esperanza discovered a natural spring among the rocks, crystalline water that flowed from the mountain like a blessing. There, she and Emilio could quench their thirst and wash their faces burned by the Altiplano's sun. Meals consisted mainly of young nopales, whose spines Esperanza carefully removed with a chipped stone, and tunas she gathered from the tallest cacti, sometimes injuring her hands on the spines in her determination to feed her son. During the day, while Emilio played with small stones among the ruins, Esperanza worked to strengthen their shelter. She mixed red clay with water from the spring, creating a rustic adobe that she used to seal cracks between stones. Her hands, once soft from protected domestic work in the hacienda, were now rough and cut, but each scar represented a small victory against helplessness. The nights were the greatest challenge. The Sierra's cold descended like a frozen blanket, making mother and son tremble even wrapped in the only blanket they possessed. Esperanza sang softly the lullabies her own mother had sung to her, her voice mixing with the sound of wind that seemed to carry echoes of remote times. It was during one of those nights that she noticed something strange. Even in the almost total darkness, one of the shelter's walls seemed to emanate a different energy, as if hiding secrets that awaited the right moment to be revealed. But before she could investigate further, the sound of horse hooves echoing along the Sierra Trail announced they were no longer alone. The jingling of harnesses and creaking of carriage wheels cut through the Sierra's silence like razors. Esperanza immediately recognized the cadenced rhythm of Doña Catalina's Criollo horses, purebred animals that stepped on the ground with the same arrogance as their mistress. A week had passed since her expulsion from the hacienda, 7 days of struggle for survival that had transformed Esperanza. Her skin, once protected by the walls of the big house, was now golden from the intense Altiplano sun, and her eyes carried a new hardness, forged on the anvil of desperation. Emilio ran to hide behind his mother's skirts when the imposing figure of Doña Catalina emerged from the carriage. The matriarch wore a traveling outfit of fine fabric, black as her mood, and carried a parasol she used less to protect herself from the sun than to demonstrate her social position. "Well, well," said Catalina, examining the ruins with eyes that gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "I see you've managed to settle into your new residence." Esperanza maintained an upright posture, despite the hunger that weakened her legs. She had learned in that week of trials that dignity was sometimes the only possession no one could take from her. "Doña Catalina," she replied with a firm voice, "to what do we owe the honor of your visit?" Her mother-in-law laughed, a sound dry as dead leaves. "I came to see if you were still alive. It would be a shame if the Sierra had solved my problems without me needing to lift a finger." Emilio, with the cruel innocence of children, came out from behind his mother and approached his grandmother. His large, dark eyes, which were an exact copy of Francisco's, shone with hope. "Abuela," he said with the weak voice of hunger, "did you bring tortillas for us? I'm very hungry." The silence that followed was sharper than any word. Doña Catalina looked at her grandson as if he were an annoying insect, then raised her silver cane and pointed to the cacti growing among the ruins. "Tortillas?" she laughed with scorn. "Boy, if you're hungry, hunt lizards, or perhaps you prefer the tunas from the nopales. They say it's food for Indians and wretches." The unnecessary cruelty of the response made something inside Esperanza harden even more. It was one thing to attack her, an adult woman who could defend herself, but humiliating a hungry child was a lowness she could not forgive. "Emilio," she said softly, "go get water from the spring." The boy obeyed, his small steps moving away among the stones. Only when he was out of earshot did Esperanza turn to directly face her antagonist. "You've said what you wanted to say, Doña Catalina. Now please withdraw from my property." The matriarch's eyes flashed with rage. With a brusque movement, she raised her cane and violently struck the north wall of the ruins. The sound of metal against adobe echoed like a shot, and small fragments of plaster came loose, revealing beneath the dark volcanic stone of the original structure. "Your property," she spat the words. "This hovel? These century-old walls are going to collapse on your heads, and when that happens, don't come asking me for help." Having said this, Catalina returned to the carriage with furious steps. Before departing, she shouted through the window, "Enjoy your palace of ruins well, because soon you won't even have that." As the noise of the carriage faded away down the Sierra, Esperanza remained staring fixedly at the place where the cane had struck the wall. Something about how the fragments had come loose, revealing a different color beneath, awakened her curiosity. She approached the wall and ran her fingers over the crack. What she saw made her furrow her brows in perplexity. The internal structure didn't seem solid as she had expected, but before she could investigate further, a dark cloud appeared on the horizon, announcing that the Sierra had other trials reserved for them. The clouds accumulated over the Sierra de Guanajuato like a somber army, carrying with them the promise of a storm that would make the rain from Francisco's funeral seem like a delicate drizzle. The air became dense and electric, making Esperanza's hair stand on end and Emilio show restlessness, like animals that sense catastrophes. "Mama, is the sky angry?" asked the boy, pointing to the black masses moving above their heads like giant hands. "No, mijo," Esperanza reassured him, although she herself felt a dark premonition. "It's just nature showing its strength." The wind began to blow with a ferocity that made the ocotes bend until they almost touched the ground. The improvised shelter that Esperanza had built with branches and adobe began to oscillate dangerously, and she realized she needed to find better, more solid refuge. They ran toward the interior of the most protected part of the ruins, where the volcanic stone walls still rose intact to a considerable height. There, mother and son huddled against the north wall, the same one that Doña Catalina had struck with her cane. The first lightning tore through the sky like a silver scar, followed by thunder that made the earth tremble under their feet. Then came the hail, ice stones the size of quail eggs that fell from the sky with the force of projectiles, hitting the ground with dry cracks that echoed among the ruins like cannon shots. Esperanza covered Emilio with her body, feeling the hailstones strike her back through the thin rebozo. The cold was so intense she could feel her bones ache, but she remained firm, protecting her son with her own life. It was then that hurricane winds struck the ruins with all their fury. What remained of the improvised roof was torn away and hurled down the sierra like paper in the wind. The wooden beams that still resisted began to groan under pressure, and Esperanza feared the entire structure would collapse on them. The torrential rainwater began to seep through the cracks in the north wall. Being built on a natural slope, water accumulated quickly, creating small streams that ran across the packed earth floor. But what happened next changed everything. The constant pressure of infiltrated water, combined with the damage caused by Doña Catalina's cane blow, caused an entire section of the north wall's plaster to begin breaking away. First came small fragments, then larger pieces, until finally a significant portion of the adobe covering came loose completely. What was revealed beneath made Esperanza gasp in surprise. The wall wasn't solid, as she had assumed. Behind the external layer of adobe and stone, there was a hollow space, a cavity that seemed to have been deliberately built into the inn's original structure. The storm continued roaring for hours, but Esperanza barely noticed it now. Her eyes were fixed on the dark opening that had been revealed, wondering what secrets might be hidden in the heart of the ruins of El Descanso del Viajero. When the tempest finally passed, leaving only the constant dripping of water running off wet stones, Esperanza knew her life was about to change again. What she didn't know was that the first rays of the rising sun would reveal golden and silver reflections coming from inside the mysterious opening. The dawn after the storm brought with it a quality of light that Esperanza had never seen before. The air was clean and crystalline, washed by the torrential rain, and each drop of water still hanging from cacti and stones captured and refracted the rays of the rising sun like tiny diamonds. Emilio still slept, wrapped in the damp blanket, exhausted by the night of terror. Esperanza, however, hadn't been able to sleep. The sight of the opening in the wall had disturbed her deeply, not with fear but with a burning curiosity that grew in her chest like a flame. As the sun rose on the eastern horizon, its rays began to penetrate obliquely through the opening revealed by the storm. And it was then that Esperanza saw something that made her heart race. Metallic reflections coming from inside the hollow wall, gleams that danced in the shadows like fallen stars. With careful movements so as not to wake Emilio, she approached the opening. The hole was large enough for her to pass her hand through, but she couldn't see clearly what was inside. Groping blindly, her fingers encountered something that made her recoil with a muffled cry. Fabric. There was fabric inside, but a fabric that disintegrated at the touch, as if it were very old, and beneath it, something cold, hard, metallic. "¿Qué pasa, mamá?" Emilio had awakened at her cry. "Nothing, mijo, go back to sleep a little longer." But she could no longer contain her curiosity. Using a chipped stone, Esperanza began to carefully widen the opening, removing loose fragments of adobe and stone. Each movement revealed more of the hidden cavity, until finally there was enough space for her to see inside. What she found left her breathless. Deerskin bags, darkened by age but still intact, were carefully arranged inside the hollow wall. Some had broken over time, spilling their metallic contents that gleamed in the morning light. Silver coins, some larger, others smaller, all engraved with symbols and coats of arms she didn't recognize. With trembling hands, Esperanza removed one of the coins from the cavity. It was heavy, solid, and even darkened by time, still maintained the characteristic shine of pure silver. On one face she could distinguish what appeared to be an eagle, on the other, symbols suggesting numbers and words in Spanish. There was more, much more. As her eyes adjusted to the hiding place's gloom, she distinguished other objects, some pieces that gleamed with the characteristic tone of gold, and small stones that reflected light differently, gems that could be emeralds or other precious stones. "Dios mío," she whispered, bringing a hand to her mouth. "Mamá, what happened?" Emilio had approached, his childish curiosity awakened by his mother's agitation. Esperanza quickly hid the coin in the folds of her dress and turned to her son with a smile, trying to disguise the whirlwind of emotions she felt. "Nothing important, mijo. I just found some old pieces that must have been forgotten here long ago." But inside, her mind seethed with questions. Whose was that treasure? Why was it hidden in the wall of the old inn? And most important, what did that discovery mean for her and Emilio's future? The distant sound of horse hooves echoing along the Sierra Trail interrupted her thoughts. Someone was approaching again, and this time, Esperanza prayed it would be someone who could help her decipher the mystery she had just discovered. Then a visitor, emerging along the Serpentine Trail, didn't come in a luxurious carriage like Doña Catalina, but mounted on a modest sorrel horse, carrying saddlebags that swayed gently with each step of the animal. Esperanza immediately recognized the bent figure of Don Esteban Herrera, the chronicler and archaeologist who lived in the city of Guanajuato and occasionally visited the region on his historical research. Don Esteban was a 65-year-old man, with graying hair always disheveled and faded blue eyes that gleamed with curious intelligence. His clothes, though simple, were always clean, and he carried with him the permanent aroma of old books and writing ink. "Doña Esperanza," he called, dismounting with the slowness of one who knows his own limits well. "I heard in town that you had moved to the ruins. I brought some provisions." Esperanza felt her eyes fill with tears of gratitude. It was the first demonstration of human kindness she had received since Francisco's death. From the saddlebags, Don Esteban took out a clay pot still warm that exhaled the tempting aroma of pozole, the traditional Mexican soup with hominy, meat, and spices. "Don Esteban," she said, accepting the pot with reverence, "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need for thanks," replied the old man with a gentle smile. "Francisco was a good man, and no child should go hungry while I have means to prevent it." Emilio appeared running at the smell of food, and Don Esteban greeted him with a loving pat on the hair. While the boy devoured his first hot meal in a week, Esperanza struggled internally about whether she should tell the chronicler about her discovery. It was the scholar's natural curiosity that resolved the dilemma for her. Don Esteban had begun examining the ruins with his usual professional interest, taking notes in a small leather notebook when he noticed the opening in the north wall. "Interesting," he murmured, approaching. "This opening didn't exist the last time I was here. The storm must have revealed something." Esperanza couldn't prevent her cheeks from flushing. Don Esteban, with the sharp perception of someone who had spent decades studying people and places, immediately noticed her nervousness. "Esperanza," he said softly, "you found something, didn't you?" With trembling fingers, she removed the silver coin from the folds of her dress and extended it to him. The chronicler's blue eyes widened, and he took the coin with the care of one who handles sacred relics. After examining it for several minutes in silence, turning it to both sides and studying each engraved detail, Don Esteban finally spoke, his voice laden with emotion. "Good God, Esperanza, this is a silver reel from the Guanajuato Mint, coined during the first years of the War of Independence. Look here," he pointed to the engraved symbols. "The Mexican eagle and the date, 1811. 1811, she repeated, not understanding the importance. "The year when Father Miguel Hidalgo was captured and executed," explained Don Esteban, his voice becoming almost a reverent whisper. "Esperanza, do you have any idea what this means?" She shook her head, but something in the chronicler's tone made her feel her life was about to change dramatically. "For years, I've heard stories about a lost treasure of the insurgency, funds raised to finance the fight for independence that mysteriously disappeared when the leaders were captured. It was said that Don Ignacio Hidalgo, distant relative of Father Hidalgo himself, had hidden the money somewhere in the Sierra before being killed by royalist forces." Don Esteban looked at the ruins with new eyes, as if seeing them for the first time. "El Descanso del Viajero wasn't just a common inn, Esperanza. It was a secret meeting point for the insurgents. And if my suspicions are correct, you've just found the legendary treasure of Mexican independence. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of wind whispering through the ocotes, as if the ghosts of the past were confirming the chronicler's words. But before they could fully process the magnitude of the discovery, the familiar sound of a carriage echoed again along the trail, and this time, Esperanza instinctively knew that Doña Catalina wasn't coming alone. The carriage approaching was different from the previous one, larger, more robust, and accompanied by two other smaller carts loaded with men carrying tools and construction equipment. Esperanza's heart sank, seeing the cold determination on Doña Catalina's face, who sat erect like a queen going to war. Don Esteban quickly pocketed the silver coin and whispered to Esperanza, "Don't say anything about our discovery. At least not yet." The entourage stopped in front of the ruins, raising a cloud of dust that made Emilio cough. Doña Catalina descended from the carriage with precise movements, carrying a leather briefcase suggesting important documents. Behind her came 10 men with pickaxes, shovels, and crowbars, workers that Esperanza recognized as being from neighboring haciendas. "Buenos dias, Don Esteban," Catalina greeted with false courtesy. "What a coincidence to find you here. Perhaps you can witness an act of necessary modernization." The chronicler inclined his head slightly, but his eyes remained alert. "Doña Catalina, may I ask what type of modernization you plan for this historical site?" "Historical?" she laughed, opening the briefcase and removing some yellowed documents. "This infected ruin will soon be just an unpleasant memory. The new railroad branch that will connect Guanajuato to San Luis Potosí will pass exactly through here." Esperanza felt the world spin around her. "Railroad? Here?" "Exactly here," confirmed Catalina, pointing to the ruins with cruel satisfaction. "Yesterday I received the documents of expropriation for public utility. This property will be demolished to make way for the rails of progress." Don Esteban frowned and extended his hand. "May I examine those documents?" Reluctantly, Catalina handed him the papers. While the chronicler studied them, she addressed the workers. "Begin with the north wall. I want this entire structure on the ground before nightfall." "No!" shouted Esperanza, running to position herself in front of the wall where the treasure was hidden. "You can't demolish my house." "Your house?" Catalina smiled like a serpent. "This isn't a house. It's an obstacle to progress. And according to these official documents, you have exactly 1 hour to remove your belongings before demolition begins." Don Esteban raised his eyes from the papers, his expression grave. "Catalina, these documents, there's something strange about them. The governor's signature doesn't match others I've seen, and the seal— Are you questioning the authenticity of official documents?" She cut him off, recovering the papers with a brusque movement. "Careful, Don Esteban. It wouldn't be prudent for a man your age to create unnecessary problems." The implicit threat made the chronicler retreat, but Esperanza saw something in his eyes that gave her hope. He had noticed something in the documents, something that could help her. "Mama," Emilio pulled at her dress, "why does the Señora want to break our house?" The child's innocent question echoed among the ruins like a war cry. Esperanza knelt and hugged her son, then rose with a determination that surprised everyone present. "Because this isn't really about railroads or progress," she said, looking directly at Catalina. "It's about humiliation and revenge. But I won't allow you to destroy the last gift Francisco gave me." "Romantic to the end," mocked Catalina. "Men, begin the work." The workers hesitated, uncomfortable with the situation. Demolishing a widow's house with her small son inside, even under the patron's orders, wasn't something they did with pleasure. It was then that Esperanza made a decision that would change everything. She positioned herself in front of the north wall, with Emilio in her arms, creating a human barrier between the workers and the hidden treasure. "If you want to demolish this wall," she said with a firm voice, "you'll have to demolish us first." The confrontation had begun, and Don Esteban knew he had little time to find a way to help the young widow, who had discovered more than just refuge in the ancient ruins. The sun was in the middle of the sky when the tension among the ruins reached its maximum point. Esperanza remained motionless in front of the north wall, Emilio clinging to her dress, her dark eyes shining with a determination reminiscent of her indigenous ancestors who had resisted countless invasions. The workers moved nervously, exchanging uncomfortable glances. They were simple men, accustomed to working the land and building, not destroying homes with families inside. The group's leader, a man with a grey moustache named Joaquin, approached Doña Catalina. "Señora," he said with a hesitant voice. "We can't work with the woman and child there. It's not right." Catalina's eyes flamed with rage. "Joaquin, you and your men are being paid to demolish these ruins, not to question my orders. If you don't complete the job, you won't see a single peso." The economic threat weighed in the air like lead. Many of those men had their own families to feed, and work was scarce in the Sierra. Joaquin lowered his head, defeated, and signaled for his companions to approach the wall. "Perdón, Doña Esperanza," he murmured, avoiding her gaze. "I have 6 children to feed." Esperanza nodded with understanding, but didn't move. "Do what you must do, Joaquin. I will too." Don Esteban watched everything with growing agony. His experienced eyes had detected forgeries in Catalina's documents, but without concrete proof, his suspicions were worth little against the matriarch's economic power. Discreetly, he checked his pocket watch. There was still an hour for his message to reach the city. Yes, he had sent one of the region's boys galloping to Guanajuato as soon as he saw the suspicious documents, carrying an urgent letter for the municipal mayor. But would it be enough time? The workers raised their pickaxes reluctantly. The sun made the metal shine like blades, creating threatening shadows on the adobe walls. Esperanza closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer, asking St. Joseph the Worker for protection for the workers who found themselves forced into this situation. "Adelante!" shouted Catalina, her patience exhausted. Joaquin raised his pickaxe, his muscles tense. The metal descended toward the wall, but stopped just centimeters from the stone. The man simply couldn't deliver the blow that could harm a woman and child. "Cobard!" roared Catalina, snatching a pickaxe from another worker's hands. "If you don't have the courage to do what's necessary, I'll do it myself." It was at that moment that destiny intervened dramatically. A distant but unmistakable sound echoed through the Sierra, the accelerated gallop of multiple horses climbing the trail toward the ruins. Don Esteban smiled for the first time in hours. "It seems we have unexpected visitors, Doña Catalina." The entourage that appeared on the trail made Catalina pale. At the front came the mayor of Guanajuato, Don Rafael Morelos, a corpulent and authoritative man mounted on an imposing black horse. Behind him, 2 federal soldiers in blue and gold uniforms, and a third man that Catalina recognized with growing horror, Federal Judge Don Patricio Vasquez. "Alto ahi!" shouted the mayor, his voice echoing with authority among the ruins. "By the power conferred upon me by the Mexican Republic, I order that you immediately cease any demolition activity at this location." Catalina dropped the pickaxe, the sound of metal against stones echoing like a gunshot. "Mayor Morelos, there's some misunderstanding. I have all the legal documents that my friend Don Esteban informed me were highly suspicious," the judge cut in, dismounting from his horse with deliberately slow movements. "Documents that, after a quick verification in our archives, we confirmed to be gross forgeries." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whispering among the ocotes. Esperanza remained motionless against the wall, barely daring to believe what was happening. Don Esteban approached the judge and whispered something in his ear. The magistrate's eyes widened, and he looked at the ruins with sudden interest. "Doña Esperanza," said the judge with a grave voice, "I have reason to believe this property may have historical significance far beyond what we knew. I need you to show me exactly what you found in these walls." The moment of truth had arrived, and Esperanza knew that the next words would determine not only her future, but possibly rewrite a piece of Mexican history. The revelation unfolded like a cascade of silver under the intense sun of the Mexican Altiplano. Esperanza, with hands still trembling from the confrontation's tension, approached the opening in the north wall and began carefully removing the deerskin bags she had discovered. The first bag she brought to light broke as soon as it touched the air, releasing a torrent of silver coins that tinkled melodiously against the groundstones. Reales, half reales, and silver pesos scattered like fallen stars, each gleaming with the characteristic luster of pure Guanajuato silver. "Dios Santísimo!" exclaimed the mayor, kneeling to examine the coins. "There are hundreds of them." But that was just the beginning. As Esperanza and Don Esteban removed more bags from the secret cavity, the treasure revealed itself in all its magnitude. Gold coins, ounces and escudos minted by the royal mint, mixed with silver like drops of liquid sun. And among them, small stones that captured light magically, emeralds from Boyaca mines that had reached Mexico through colonial trade routes. Doña Catalina observed the scene in mortal silence, her face pale as wax. The workers who moments before had wielded pickaxes against the ruins now whispered among themselves in reverent tones, some crossing themselves upon recognizing the historical magnitude of what they witnessed. Don Esteban picked up a gold coin and examined it carefully. "Look at this," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "This mark here, this symbol engraved beside the Mexican eagle, it's Don Ignacio Hidalgo's personal seal." The federal judge approached to examine the coin. His legal knowledge included familiarity with historical documents, and what he saw confirmed his growing suspicions. "Gentlemen," he announced with solemnity, "we stand before the legendary treasure of the Mexican insurgency. The funds that our independence heroes raised to finance the fight against Spanish rule, thought lost forever." Emilio, who had observed everything with wide eyes, approached an emerald that gleamed like a green water drop among the coins. "Mama, are they magic stones?" The child's innocent question brought smiles to the lips of everyone present, except Catalina. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had tried to expel Esperanza from a worthless property had inadvertently revealed one of the greatest archaeological treasures in Mexican history. Don Patricio, the judge, cleared his throat and assumed his official role. According to the Republic's laws, archaeological treasures discovered on private property remain under custody of the legal owner, provided they are adequately documented and preserved. He turned to Esperanza with a solemn expression. "Doña Esperanza, do you have the documents proving legal ownership of this land?" With trembling hands, Esperanza removed from her bosom the paper Francisco had given her years before, the property registry he had made at the Guanajuato registry office, recording the ruins of El Descanso del Viajero in his wife's name as a wedding gift. The judge examined the document carefully, verifying seals and signatures. After several minutes that seemed eternal, he raised his eyes with a smile. "This document is completely legitimate and in perfect legal order. Doña Esperanza Morales de Mendoza is the legal owner of this land and, by extension, of all archaeological treasure discovered on it." The declaration echoed among the ruins like a divine decree. Esperanza felt her legs weaken, and Don Esteban quickly supported her. "However," continued the judge, "given the historical importance of this discovery, the federal government requests that you allow historians and archaeologists to study and catalogue the treasure before determining its final disposition." Esperanza nodded, still in shock. In a matter of hours, she had gone from evicted widow to guardian of one of the most important treasures in Mexican history. But Doña Catalina had not yet said her last word. The afternoon sun tinted the ruins golden when Doña Catalina finally found her voice, which emerged like the roar of a wounded beast. The treasure's discovery had transformed her attempt to humiliate Esperanza into the greatest humiliation of her own life. "Esto es una farsa," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the scattered coins. "That treasure belongs by right to the Mendoza family. My late husband, Don Alejandro, was a direct descendant of the Hidalgos." Judge Vasquez raised an eyebrow, his expression remaining impassive. "Interesting claim, Doña Catalina. Do you have documents proving that ancestry?" The documents are at home, but," she stammered, realizing the fragility of her position. "Furthermore," intervened Don Esteban with a calm but firm voice, "there's the small matter of the falsified documents you presented today. Falsification of federal documents is a grave crime against the Republic." Catalina paled even more, if that were possible. "I don't know what you're talking about. Those documents are legitimate." "Señora," said Mayor Morelos, approaching with the papers in his hands, "examine these signatures more closely. Do you know the governor's handwriting well?" With trembling hands, Catalina took the documents. Under public scrutiny, the forgeries became obvious even to her. The ink was too new, the paper quality inadequate for official documents, and the signatures were gross imitations. I paid good money for these documents," she admitted, her voice becoming a whisper. "A man in Guanajuato guaranteed they were authentic." "Then you were a victim of fraud," said the judge with false sympathy, "which doesn't absolve you of trying to use false documents to expropriate someone else's property." The reality of her situation began to impose itself on Catalina. Not only had she failed to expel Esperanza, but she now faced possible criminal charges. And worse still, the treasure's discovery meant that the widow she despised had become, overnight, one of the richest women in the region. "There's one more thing, Doña Catalina," said Don Esteban, taking a small notebook from his pocket. "During my historical research, I discovered some interesting records about the War of Independence period. He opened the notebook to a marked page. According to documents from the time, the Mendoza family not only didn't support the insurgency, but actively collaborated with Spanish royalist forces. Your father-in-law, Don Alejandro Mendoza, denounced several insurgents to colonial authorities. The silence that followed was deafening. The workers, who had observed everything in respectful silence, now whispered among themselves. In post-independence Mexican culture, being descended from royalist collaborators was a mark of deep shame. This means, continued the chronicler implacably, that even if there were some genealogical link to Don Ignacio Hidalgo, the Mendoza family would have lost any moral right to the insurgency treasure through their ancestors' act of treason. Catalina staggered as if she had received a physical blow. Her entire life of aristocratic privileges was crumbling before her eyes, revealing that her pretensions of superiority were based on a family history of betrayal to the homeland. "Doña Catalina," said the judge with a grave voice, "you are being detained for falsification of official documents and attempted property usurpation. You will be escorted back to the city to await trial." The federal soldiers approached, but Catalina still had one last card to play. With a sudden movement, she lunged toward the scattered treasure, trying to grab as many coins as possible. "If I can't have everything, at least I'll take what I can," she screamed desperately. But Joaquin, the workers' leader, intercepted her with gentleness but firmness. "Perdón, señora, but that doesn't belong to you." The simple man's dignity contrasted dramatically with the fallen aristocrat's desperation. It was as if the entire social order was inverting before those ancient ruins. While Catalina was escorted away by authorities, Esperanza remained silent, observing the scene with a mixture of sadness and relief. She felt no pleasure in her mother-in-law's humiliation, but justice had finally prevailed. Don Esteban approached her and placed a paternal hand on her shoulder. "Esperanza, you know what this means, don't you?" She shook her head, still processing the day's extraordinary events. "It means you and Emilio will never go without again. But more important than that," he smiled, "it means the history of Mexican independence has just been enriched with a chapter we thought lost forever." As the sun set over the Sierra de Guanajuato, painting the ruins with tones of gold and scarlet, Esperanza held Emilio against her chest and contemplated the future that had been transformed by the storm and the discovery she had brought forth. The insurgency's treasure had found its guardian, and a new story was just beginning. 2 years later, spring 1883, the season's first rains transformed the Sierra landscape into a green carpet dotted with wildflowers. Where once stood only the melancholic ruins of El Descanso del Viajero, now flourished a prosperous property that had become the jewel of the Guanajuato region. Esperanza, now 27 years old, walked through the gardens of her new hacienda with steps reflecting the confidence she had developed over 2 years of transformations. Her dress, though still simple, was made of fine, well-cut fabric, and her hair was arranged in an elegant bun that revealed a face that had acquired the serenity of one who had known the depths of despair and found strength to emerge from it. The main house, built of white adobe with volcanic stone details, was an example of colonial Mexican architecture in its most refined form. Shaded corridors surrounded the structure, and wide windows allowed the Sierra breeze to circulate through spacious rooms. In the center, an internal courtyard housed a cantera stone fountain where crystalline water bubbled constantly, creating soft music that mixed with birdsong. Emilio, now a 10-year-old boy with features increasingly reminiscent of his deceased father, ran among the fruit trees planted in the first year. His sun-bronzed face radiated the health and happiness of a child who grew up knowing himself loved and secure. "Mama," he shouted, running toward his mother with something in his hands. "Look, Don Esteban brought new history books." Don Esteban, who had become not only a family friend but also the property's official historical consultant, approached smiling. His hair was whiter, but his eyes maintained the same curious vivacity as always. "Buenos dias, Esperanza," he greeted, respectfully kissing her hand. "I brought the printed proofs of the book about the insurgency treasure. The publisher in Mexico City was fascinated by our discovery." Esperanza accepted the manuscript with reverence. The work, titled The Last Refuge, the story of Don Ignacio Hidalgo's lost treasure, would be published by the first Mexican national publisher and had already awakened international interest. "And the other news?" she asked, indicating they should sit on the shaded veranda. "The school is almost finished," Don Esteban reported with satisfaction. 50 children from the region will be able to study free of charge starting next month, and the medical dispensary has already treated more than 200 families since it was inaugurated. Esperanza had used a significant part of the treasure to build a school and medical post to serve the entire region. The decision, initially viewed with skepticism by some, had transformed not only her public image, but the entire social dynamic of the area. "And Doña Catalina?" she asked, though she did so more out of courtesy than real interest. Don Esteban sighed. She lost almost everything in the legal proceedings. The hacienda was sold to pay fines and compensation. She now lives in a small house in the city, sustained by a minimal pension. Many of the workers who once served the Mendoza family came to work here. It was true. Esperanza's transformation from evicted widow to Doña Esperanza, la benefactora de San Rafael, had attracted the region's best workers. They came not only for the promise of fair wages, but for the dignity with which they were treated. Joaquin, the same man who had hesitated to demolish the ruins 2 years before, had become the property's head foreman. His loyalty to Esperanza was absolute, fruit not only of gratitude, but of the genuine respect he had developed for his patrona. "There's one more thing," said Don Esteban, taking an official letter from his pocket. "The federal government officially approved the designation of the original ruins as a National Historical Monument. They will be preserved exactly as they were when the treasure was discovered. In the garden, a section of the original walls of El Descanso del Viajero had been carefully preserved. The opening in the north wall remained as it was on the day of discovery, but now protected by a glass roof that allowed visitation without damaging the ancient structure. A bronze plaque, installed with ceremony on the first anniversary of the discovery, bore an inscription Esperanza had composed personally. Aquí yace el tesoro de la libertad, 1811-1881. May the memory of those who fought for our independence never be forgotten." Emilio approached running, interrupting the adult's reflections. "Mama, Don Joaquin said more letters arrived from people wanting to visit the museum." Yes, in addition to everything else, Esperanza had created a small museum on the hacienda grounds, displaying part of the historical treasure and telling the story of the Mexican insurgency. Visitors came from all over the country and even from abroad to see the discovery site. "Tell Don Joaquin to schedule the visits for next week," Esperanza replied. "This weekend is for family." Family. The word had new meaning now. It included not only her and Emilio, but Don Esteban, the loyal workers, the school children, the dispensary patients. All united by bonds that went beyond blood, bonds forged in the common struggle for dignity and justice. As the sun set over the Sierra de Guanajuato, painting the mountains with their eternal colors of gold and purple, Esperanza allowed herself a moment of deep gratitude. The storm that had revealed the treasure had also revealed her own inner strength, transforming a victim of circumstances into a woman who had found her true destiny. But the story wasn't over yet. Autumn 1883. The message arrived on a golden October afternoon, brought by a messenger who had ridden without stop from the city of Guanajuato. Esperanza immediately recognized the federal government's official seal on the sealed envelope, and her heart accelerated with a mixture of expectation and apprehension. Don Esteban was present for the weekly meeting about the property's affairs when she opened the letter. Her eyes quickly scanned the lines written in formal language, and her expression passed from curiosity to astonishment, then to something close to incredulity. "Don Esteban," she said, her voice tremulous, "you need to read this." The chronicler adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "By order of His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Doña Esperanza Morales de Mendoza, is invited to appear at the federal capital to receive the Order of National Merit, in recognition of her exceptional services to the preservation of Mexican historical patrimony and her contribution to the nation's education and public health." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the fountain bubbling in the central courtyard. Emilio, who was playing nearby, approached curiously upon perceiving the moment's solemnity. "¿Qué pasa, mamá?" "Nothing serious, mijo," she replied, still processing the magnitude of the official recognition. "The President of the Republic wants to meet us." During the following months, while preparing for the trip to the capital, Esperanza reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken her from the empty ruins to the halls of national power. The transformation hadn't been merely external. She had discovered within herself a strength and wisdom she never knew she possessed. The ceremony in December was an occasion of pomp and circumstance that contrasted dramatically with the simplicity of Esperanza's origins. Wearing a finely embroidered traditional Mexican outfit, a tribute to her roots, she received the decoration from the president's own hands before an assembly that included diplomats, intellectuals, and prominent figures of Mexican society. But it was the speech she delivered on the occasion that truly captured the national imagination. Instead of talking about her own trajectory, Esperanza chose to honor all those who had fought for Mexican independence, especially the anonymous heroes whose sacrifice had made possible the freedom they now enjoyed. "The treasure we found in the ruins," she said to the silent audience, "is not just gold and silver coins. It is tangible proof that ordinary men and women can accomplish extraordinary feats when they fight for something greater than themselves. Each peso, each real found in those walls, represents the hope of a people who refuse to accept oppression." The words echoed through the hall and subsequently through newspapers that carried her message throughout the country. Esperanza had become more than a treasure discoverer. She had transformed into a voice of Mexican historical conscience. After the ceremony, during the official banquet, she was approached by an elderly man of distinguished appearance who introduced himself as a historian from the National University. "Señora Mendoza," he said with reverence, "there's something I'd like to share with you. After extensive genealogical research, we discovered that you have a blood connection to the Morales family that actively participated in the insurgency in Guanajuato." Esperanza looked at him with surprise. "How so?" "Your great-grandfather, according to our records, was Juan Morales, one of the local organizers of the insurgent support network. He worked directly with Don Ignacio Hidalgo in creating secret hiding places, including possibly the one you discovered." The revelation added an almost mystical dimension to the treasure discovery. It hadn't been coincidence that she, and no one else, had found the hidden funds of the insurgency. It was as if destiny itself had conspired for her ancestors' sacrifices to finally be honored. Back at the hacienda after the ceremony, Esperanza found a surprise that moved her more than all the official recognitions. The local community had organized its own celebration, a festival that included mariachi music, folk dancing, and a banquet prepared with traditional regional recipes. "Esto es para usted, Doña Esperanza," said Joaquin, presenting her with a gift on behalf of all the workers. It was a finely hand-woven rebozo, decorated with motifs that told the story of her journey from ruins to prosperity. That night, while festivities continued under the Sierra stars, Esperanza climbed to the preserved site of the original ruins. There, in the soft light of votive candles that visitors usually lit, she knelt before the wall where everything had begun. "Francisco," she whispered to the night wind, "I fulfilled the promise I made to you. Our son grew strong and dignified, and the property you gave me transformed into something beautiful." A gentle breeze blew through the ocotes, carrying with it the aroma of wild sage and the distant sound of celebration music. For a moment, Esperanza felt a warm presence beside her, as if Francisco's spirit were there to witness everything she had achieved. But there was one last surprise waiting for her. Spring 1885, 2 years after the national ceremony. Dawn over Hacienda. Esperanza painted the Guanajuato mountains with tones of pink and gold, a symphony of colors that reflected in the central courtyard fountain like a promise of infinite days. Esperanza, now 29 years old, contemplated the landscape from her house's veranda with the serenity of one who had found her true place in the world. Emilio, transformed at 12 into a young man with upright posture and intelligent gaze, approached carrying an envelope that had arrived with the morning mail. His movements had Francisco's natural grace, but his eyes carried the silent determination he had inherited from his mother. "Mama, a letter arrived from Don Esteban," he said, extending the envelope. "It looks important." Esperanza smiled, recognizing the chronicler's elegant handwriting. In recent years, he had become not only a dear friend but a constant presence in their lives, helping catalogue and preserve the historical heritage they had discovered. The letter brought extraordinary news. The National University of Mexico had decided to establish a permanent historical research center on the property, recognizing it as one of the country's most important archaeological sites. Esperanza would be named honorary director, a position that would allow her to continue her preservation work while receiving international academic support. "There's more, mijo," she said, continuing to read. "They're going to build a library specialized in Mexican independence history, and the first book to be acquired Is Don Esteban's about our discovery?" Emilio smiled, his eyes shining with the pride he always felt for his mother. "Does that mean we'll have university professors living here?" "Yes, and students too. Our house will transform into a learning center where people from around the world will come to study Mexico's history." The situation's irony wasn't lost on Esperanza. The woman Doña Catalina had tried to humiliate for her humble origins would now be hostess to some of the country's greatest intellectuals. Knowledge, like the treasure found in the ruins, had always been there, waiting only for the right hands to reveal it. During breakfast, served on the veranda shaded by flowering jacarandas, Joaquin approached with the daily property report. The hacienda now employed more than 50 families, all receiving fair wages and dignified housing. The school served 80 children, and the medical dispensary had expanded to include a small hospital serving the entire region. "Doña Esperanza," said Joaquin with a smile, "the university engineers arrived yesterday to begin studies for the new research center. They wanted to thank you personally for allowing them to work here." "The gratitude is mine, Joaquin. This place ceased being just a property to become a symbol of hope for the entire region." After breakfast, Esperanza and Emilio walked to the preserved memorial of the original ruins. With each visit, she felt a deep connection to the insurgents who had risked everything for Mexico's freedom. Their struggles and sacrifices had made possible not only political independence, but also the social transformation she witnessed in her own life. A new plaque had been installed at the memorial, this time written in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and French, to accommodate international visitors who came to study the site. The main inscription, however, remained the same that Esperanza had composed years before. "Aquí yace el tesoro de la libertad, 1881. "Mamá," said Emilio, kneeling to touch the bronze plaque, "sometimes I think about Papa and wonder if he knew this place held so many secrets." Esperanza placed a loving hand on her son's shoulder. "I believe he did, mijo. Your father was a wise man. Perhaps he sensed there was something special about these ruins, something waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And do you think he would be proud of what we did here?" "I'm absolutely certain," she replied, looking at the transformed landscape stretching before them. "Your father always believed ordinary people could do extraordinary things, and we proved he was right." As the sun rose in the Mexican sky, bathing the hacienda with its golden light, the day's first visitors arrived, university students, international researchers, and local families who came to learn about their own history. Each group brought their own questions and discoveries, continuously enriching understanding about the independence period. Esperanza received them with the natural grace she had developed over the years, knowing that each visitor would take with them not only historical knowledge, but also the inspiration that adversity can transform into triumph when faced with courage and dignity. In the afternoon, when visitors departed and the hacienda recovered its tranquility, Esperanza sat again on the veranda with Emilio by her side. The comfortable silence between mother and son was broken only by the sound of the fountain and the distant song of birds that had made nests in the flowering gardens. "Do you know what I learned from all this, mijo?" she said, observing the mountains that turned purple with the sunset. "What, Mama?" "That true treasures aren't made of gold or silver. They're made of preserved dignity, shared knowledge, and hope transmitted from generation to generation. The treasure we found in the ruins was just the beginning. The real treasure is what we built with our own hands and hearts." Emilio nodded with the precocious maturity he had developed through his childhood's extraordinary experiences. "And this treasure can never be stolen or lost, verdad?" "Never, mijo, because it lives in what we are, and in what we teach others." As stars began to appear in the Sierra's clear sky, mother and son remained there, united not only by blood bonds, but by the shared journey that had taken them from the ruins of despair to the gardens of hope. Esperanza's story had become legend, told and retold throughout the Mexican Republic as proof that justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually prevails. More importantly still, it had become a beacon for all those facing their own storms, showing that even in the darkest moments, dawn always comes for those with courage to resist until they see it rise. And so, under the eternal stars of the Sierra de Guanajuato, the woman who had been evicted as a pauper and discovered a national treasure found her true wealth, the certainty that she had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of all who had been touched by her extraordinary journey.